The rejection ceremony was supposed to destroy her. Every wolf in the Thornhaven Great Hall knew it. 300 of them packed shoulder to shoulder on the stone benches, torchlight casting their faces in amber and shadow, all waiting for the moment Saren Crane would shatter. Because that was what rejected wolves did. They screamed. They clawed at their own chests as the bond ripped free. They begged on their knees for mercy, for reconsideration, for one more chance to prove they were worthy of love. Saren had watched it happen twice before, once to a servant girl who had wailed so violently they'd had to drag her from the hall, and once to a warrior who had collapsed and not risen for 3 days. The severing of a mate bond was described in the old texts as a death that left you breathing, and everyone in this room expected her to prove it. She stood on the raised platform at the center of the hall, positioned like a prisoner awaiting sentencing. Her dress was plain gray linen, deliberately chosen by her uncle to strip her of any dignity. No jewelry, no adornment. Her dark hair was unbraided, falling past her shoulders in a way that made her look younger than her 23 years, smaller, easier to dismiss. Aldrich Vaughn stood 5 feet away from her, close enough that she could count the flecks of gold in his amber eyes, far enough that his skin wouldn't accidentally brush hers. He was beautiful. She'd give him that. Tall and broad-shouldered, with a jaw like cut stone and copper-brown hair that caught the firelight. The kind of man songs were written about. The kind of man every unmated she-wolf in the 5 kingdoms would have killed to call hers. He'd been kind to her once. In the hazy watercolor memories of childhood, she could still feel his small hand wrapped around hers as they ran through the autumn woods. "We'll rule the pack together someday," he'd whispered with a gap-toothed grin. "I'll be Alpha, and you'll be my Luna, and no one will ever be mean to you again." But children grew up, and Aldrich had learned what the rest of the world already knew, that Saren's mother had been a witch. That the blood in her veins was polluted, tainted, an abomination against the natural order of wolves. The boy who had held her hand became the man who couldn't stand to look at her. "Let the rejection be witnessed," announced Pack Alpha Matus Crane from his elevated throne, Saren's uncle, the man who had taken her in after her mother's execution and reminded her every single day since that she existed only because he permitted it. Aldrich stepped forward. His voice carried through the hall with practiced authority, each word a blade meant to cut her open in front of everyone she'd ever known. "I, Aldrich Vaughn, son of Betavorn, reject you, Saren Crane, as my mate and future Luna." The bond began to tear. Saren felt it, a ripping sensation deep in her chest, like fishhooks dragged slowly through the meat of her heart. Every instinct, every primal wolf impulse buried in her blood screamed at her to fight it, to lunge forward, to beg, to do anything, anything, to make the agony stop. But Saren had spent 18 years preparing for this moment. She'd known since she was 12 that Aldrich would reject her. She'd seen it in the way his eyes slid past her at gatherings, in the careful distance he maintained, in the quiet conversations he had with his father that went silent whenever she entered a room. She'd had 6 years to rehearse this, 6 years to build walls thick enough to hold. She breathed through the pain, kept her spine straight, let her face remain perfectly, absolutely empty. "I reject you because you are unworthy," Aldrich continued, louder now, feeding on the crowd's approval. "Because your mother was a witch who betrayed our kind. Because your existence is an insult to every pure-blooded wolf in this hall." Murmurs of agreement rippled outward like stones dropped in water. Saren said nothing. Her silence seemed to unsettle Aldrich more than tears would have. "Well?" he demanded, a flicker of something uncertainty perhaps, or wounded pride crossing his handsome face. "Don't you have anything to say?" Saren met his gaze, held it, let 3 full heartbeats pass in silence while 300 wolves held their breath. And then she smiled. Not a broken smile, not a trembling, barely held together grimace. A real smile, calm, quiet, touched with something that looked almost like pity, as if she were the one letting him go. "I accept your rejection," she said. Her voice didn't waver, didn't crack. 4 words delivered with the same steady composure as someone declining a second cup of tea. The silence that followed was suffocating. Wolves shifted on their benches. Someone coughed nervously. The wrongness of it pressed against the walls of the great hall like a living thing. Rejected wolves were supposed to break. They were supposed to collapse and claw and scream. This calm, this eerie stillness, this smile, it violated something fundamental about the natural order. "That's it?" Aldrich looked almost offended. "You're not going to beg? Would it change anything?" His jaw tightened. "No. Then no. I won't beg." Alpha Matus raised his hand for silence, though the hall was already quieter than a graveyard. "The rejection is witnessed. Saren Crane, you are hereby declared." Wait. The voice came from the shadows at the back of the hall. It was low, quiet, barely above a murmur. And yet it carried an authority so absolute that every wolf in the room stopped breathing. Not by choice, by instinct. The way prey freezes when it senses something ancient and lethal moving through the dark. Saren watched the crowd part like water before the prow of a warship, and through that opening walked Alpha King Corvain of Valdris. He was tall. That was her first coherent thought, because her mind needed something simple to hold on to before it could process the rest of him. He was the tallest wolf she had ever seen, broad-shouldered beneath a long coat of deep black, his dark hair falling across a face that looked as though it had been carved from the heart of winter. Sharp cheekbones, a hard mouth, and eyes pale gray, clear as frozen lakes, and utterly, completely merciless. The most powerful wolf in the 5 kingdoms, the coldest ruler their kind had ever known. A king who hadn't taken a mate in 12 years of reign, who had turned away princesses and daughters of lords without so much as a second glance. He was supposed to arrive tomorrow. He was supposed to be here for matters of state territorial disputes, trade negotiations, the mundane machinery of governance. He was not supposed to be standing in the middle of a rejection ceremony in a minor pack's great hall, his presence pressing down on every wolf in the room like the weight of a glacier. "Your Majesty," Alpha Matus stammered, dropping into a bow so quickly he nearly tripped. "We weren't expecting you until—" "Continue." The king's voice cut him off. "Not loud. It didn't need to be." He walked toward the platform, the crowd folding away from him with the instinct of creatures who understood, on a cellular level, that they were in the presence of an apex predator. His boots made no sound on the stone floor. The torches seemed to dim as he passed, as if even fire deferred to him. He stopped directly in front of Saren. Up close, she could see more a thin scar running along the line of his jaw, shadows carved deep beneath his eyes, and something else, a coldness that radiated from him like mist off a frozen river. Not cruelty, something deeper, something broken. "You accepted the rejection," he said. "Yes, Your Majesty. Without begging. Yes." "And you smiled." She hadn't expected him to mention that. "Yes. Why?" The question hung in the air. 300 wolves waited. Saren looked into those winter gray eyes and told him the truth. because begging wouldn't have changed the outcome. And I refused to give my pain to people who would enjoy watching me bleed. Something moved in those frozen eyes. She couldn't name it, it was there, and gone too quickly. A shadow beneath ice, a flicker of light in a room that had been dark for years. The silence stretched until it became a living thing with teeth. Then Alpha King Corvain turned to her uncle, and when he spoke, his voice cut through the silence like a blade through silk. "I'm taking her." The hall erupted. "Your Majesty," Matus sputtered, his composure fracturing like thin glass. "Surely you can't be serious. She's a half-blood, a witch's daughter. She's not fit to clean your floors, let alone— I don't recall asking for your opinion." Corvain's voice didn't rise. The temperature, however, dropped. Frost crystallized along the edge of the nearest torch bracket with a soft, crackling sound that silenced every protest in the room. Saren stood frozen, her mind racing to catch up with reality. The Alpha King was claiming her. The most powerful wolf alive had watched her accept rejection with a smile, and something in him had— What? Broken? Awakened? "This must be a mistake," she heard herself say. Corvain turned those pale eyes back to her. "Do I look like a man who makes mistakes?" He didn't. He looked like a man who calculated every breath with surgical precision, who weighed every word on a scale that measured in lives. "No, Your Majesty." "Then we understand each other." He addressed the hall again, though his words were clearly aimed at her uncle. "The half-blood leaves with me tonight. Consider Thornhaven's debts to the crown forgiven in exchange." Saren watched the calculation ripple across her uncle's face, outrage warring with greed. Whatever Thornhaven owed the crown, and she could guess it was staggering, was enough to make Mattis swallow every ounce of pride he possessed. "Very well," her uncle said slowly, each word extracted like a rotten tooth. "If Your Majesty wishes to collect her, we won't stand in your way. Collect. As if she were property. As if she were cargo being loaded onto a ship." "Come," Corvain said to Saren. Not a request, not an invitation. A command issued with the quiet certainty of a man who had never been disobeyed. She followed him through the parting crowd, whispers trailing in their wake like smoke. "He'll tire of her in a week. She'll be dead within a month. Witchblood at court? Has the king gone mad?" They reached the courtyard where a black carriage waited, drawn by 4 horses whose eyes reflected crimson in the torchlight. Guards in dark armor flanked it, their faces hidden behind visors shaped like wolves. Corvain paused at the carriage door. "You're shaking!" Was she? Seren looked down. Fine tremors ran through her fingers, betraying the terror she'd been holding behind a locked door in her chest. "I apologize, Your Majesty." "Don't. Get in." The interior was unexpectedly warm, dark velvet lining the walls and seats, a small iron brazier burning quietly in the corner. The door closed behind them. The carriage lurched forward into the night. They were alone. "Why?" Saren asked. She couldn't stop the word from escaping. It was too large, too urgent, too dangerous to hold inside. "You could have anyone. Princesses, noblewomen, wolves with bloodlines stretching back 1,000 years. Why me?" Corvain sat across from her, his face half illuminated by the brazier's glow. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he studied her with an expression she couldn't decipher. Not hunger, not curiosity, something more clinical. A man examining a key and wondering if it might fit a lock he'd been trying to open for 12 years. "You're wrong about your worth," he said finally. "I'm a half-blood outcast with nothing to my name." You stood on that platform and smiled while a bond was torn from your chest. You looked a room full of wolves who wanted to see you destroyed straight in the eye and denied them the satisfaction. He paused. That is not nothing. The words settled over her like a blanket, warm and foreign. No one had ever described her survival as strength before. In Thornhaven, her composure was called defiance, stubbornness, proof that witch blood made her unnatural. No one had ever suggested that refusing to break was something to admire. "Are you going to hurt me?" she asked. Surprise crossed his face barely, just a flicker, but genuine, almost offended. "No. Then what do you want from me?" "I want you to serve a purpose. In exchange, you'll have protection, comfort, and a status that Thornhaven could never have offered you. And if I refuse, you won't. You seem very certain. Because you're a survivor." His eyes held hers, unblinking. "And survivors don't refuse chances to live." The words cut deeper than she expected, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. She had spent her entire life doing whatever it took to survive, swallowing humiliation, enduring cruelty, building walls so high and thick that nothing could reach the fragile thing she kept hidden at her core. She wasn't going to stop now. "Fine," she whispered. "I'll hear your offer when we reach Valdris." "Good. Now sleep. It's a long journey." She should have stayed awake. Should have kept her guard up, planned her next move, prepared for whatever waited at the end of this road. But exhaustion was a tide that had been rising for 18 years, and it finally pulled her under. Her eyes drifted closed, and she didn't see Corvain watching her in the dim light, didn't see the way his frozen gaze softened just barely, just for a moment, into something raw. Didn't hear him whisper, so quietly that even wolf ears would have missed it. Finally, 3 days later, the carriage crested a mountain ridge, and Seren saw Valdris for the first time. The castle rose from the peaks like a crown of black stone and silver ice. Towers pierced the clouds, their spires vanishing into perpetual mist. Waterfalls of frozen water clung to the cliffs beneath it, glittering like rivers of crushed diamond. Even from a distance, she could feel the cold radiating outward, not the natural cold of altitude, but something deeper, older, wrong. By the time they reached the gates, Seren's nerves were wound tight enough to snap. She was led through corridors of polished obsidian and silver fixtures, past servants who stared with open curiosity and guards who stared with none, to chambers larger than anything she had ever occupied. A massive bed draped in white furs, a fireplace tall enough to stand in, windows overlooking a frozen world that stretched to the horizon. "The king will send for you this evening," a servant announced. "Clothing has been provided." When the summons came, Seren followed a guard through a maze of corridors to the king's private study. Books lined every wall, floor to ceiling, their spines cracked with use. A fire crackled in the hearth, and standing behind a wide desk, his back to her, silhouetted against the glow, was Corvain. "Sit," he said without turning. She lowered herself into a leather chair, her heart hammering against her ribs. The king turned. In the firelight, she could see how deep the exhaustion was carved into his face, not the tiredness of a sleepless night, but the bone-deep weariness of a man who had been fighting something for a very long time and was slowly losing. "I'm going to explain something to you," he said, "and you're going to listen without interruption." "Yes, Your Majesty." He studied her for a long moment, as if measuring whether she could bear the weight of what he was about to say. Then he began. 12 years ago, I took the throne after my father's death. I was 21, and I inherited a curse, a blood curse placed on the kings of Valdris 300 years ago by a witch. Saren's breath caught. The curse is simple, Corvain continued, his voice stripped of emotion, reciting facts the way a physician describes a terminal diagnosis. Every king of Valdris slowly loses his wolf. His warmth, his ability to feel anything at all. We become cold, literally and figuratively, frozen from the inside out. My father was a hollow shell by the time he died. He couldn't feel the fire, couldn't feel pain, couldn't recognize my mother's face. He raised his hand, palm up. In the firelight, Saren watched frost crystals bloom across his skin like flowers made of ice. They spread, glittering, beautiful in their cruelty. Then they receded, leaving his skin pale and bloodless. "I'm halfway there," he said. She stared at where the frost had been. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because there is one way to break the curse. The king must find his true mate, his actual fated mate, chosen by the goddess herself. Not arranged, not political, true." The weight of his attention pressed against her like a physical force. "For 12 years I've searched," he said. "I have met every eligible wolf in the 5 kingdoms, every princess, every noblewoman, every healer and warrior and scholar who might carry even a spark of what I need. I felt nothing, not even a flicker." He paused. The fire crackled. The silence grew teeth, until 3 nights ago. Saren's breath faltered. When you accepted your rejection without begging," my wolf stirred. "For the first time in years, I felt something. Not fully, not the complete recognition of a mate bond, but enough. A whisper, a possibility." "I'm a half-blood," she protested, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "A witch's daughter. I'm the last person who could." "I don't know what you are," Corvain said, cutting her off without raising his voice. "But my wolf knows something, and I need to find out what." He moved closer, and she could feel the cold rolling off him in waves, winter wrapped in human skin. "Here is my offer. Stay in Valdris. Allow me to discover whether you're my true mate. In exchange, you'll be protected, provided for, and treated as an honored guest. Everything Thornhaven denied you will be yours. And if I'm not your mate, you'll be free to go, with enough gold to live comfortably for the rest of your life. And if I am, hope." She saw it buried so deep beneath years of ice that it was barely recognizable, but unmistakably, undeniably present. A fragile, desperate thing, blinking in the light for the first time in over a decade. "Then you'll save my life," he said quietly. "And I'll spend the rest of mine making sure you never regret it." Saren looked at this cursed king, this man slowly turning to ice from the inside out who had watched a half-blood nobody accept rejection with a smile, and felt his dying wolf stir for the first time in 12 years. "I agree to your terms," she said. Corvain exhaled. It was the first time she had seen tension leave his body. "Good. We begin tomorrow." He turned back to the window. The frost on the glass reflected his face like a ghost's. "One more thing," he said. "I should be honest with you. I am incapable of love. The curse has taken that from me. Whatever happens between us, whatever we discover, never expect me to feel anything for you. I understand, Your Majesty." She stood, crossed to the door, opened it, and the moment she stepped across the threshold, something happened that neither of them saw. A small flame, golden, warm, impossibly bright, flickered to life in the center of her palm. It burned for 1 breath, 2, then vanished. A fire that had been dormant for 20 years finally awakened. The days that followed carved a strange, tentative rhythm into Saren's life. Each morning, she was summoned to Corvain's study. She would sit across from him while he took her hand, his frozen fingers wrapped around her warm ones, and they waited for a spark, for recognition, for the mate bond to declare itself. Nothing happened. No lightning, no cosmic confirmation. Just the cold weight of his hand in hers and the quiet sound of disappointment he tried to hide. But he kept trying. "You're frustrated," Seren observed on the 5th day. "I'm patient. You're lying." His eyebrows rose fractionally. "Most people are afraid to call me a liar. My fear reserves are depleted." For one impossible, fleeting second, his lips twitched. Almost a smile. The closest thing to warmth she had seen from him. She filed it away like a treasure. In the evenings, things shifted further. He began requesting her company beyond the testing session's dinners in his private quarters where the fire crackled and conversation unspooled slowly, carefully, like two people learning to trust. He asked about Thornhaven. At first, she deflected, but he waited with the patience of glaciers, and eventually, the truth spilled out. Her mother's execution, witnessed when Saren was 3. Her uncle's cold charity. The servants who spat in her food. The children who threw stones. The constant, grinding knowledge that she was tolerated, never accepted, never wanted. When she finished, Corvain's expression could have frozen the sun. "If I had known," he said, each word measured and lethal, "I would have burned Thornhaven to the ground." She believed him. "You're not eating enough," he said at dinner the following night. It wasn't a question. "I wasn't a priority in Thornhaven. You are here." 3 words, simple, devastating. She felt them crack something open inside her chest, not painfully, but like sunlight finding its way through boards nailed over a window. "Why do you care?" she whispered. Corvain's jaw tightened. "I don't know," he said. "And that troubles me more than you can imagine." The night everything changed began with frost. Saren woke in darkness to a sound she couldn't name, a crackling, spreading thing, like ice forming on a lake. She followed it to Corvain's chambers and found him on the floor, convulsing, frost crawling across his skin in jagged white veins. His eyes were open but unseeing, and the cold pouring off him was so intense it burned. "Corvain," she dropped beside him, pulling his rigid body against hers. "Hold on to me." His arms clutched her convulsively. "The curse," he gasped. "It's accelerating. Something has changed." What could change it? "Hope." His teeth chattered violently. "The curse feeds on despair, but hope, makes it fight harder to extinguish what threatens it." Understanding crashed through her like a wave. "You started hoping, because of me." "For the first time in 12 years, he rasped. "I thought maybe I don't have to die alone." And the curse felt it. "And now, it's trying to kill me before—" His voice broke. She held him tighter, pouring every ounce of warmth she had into the embrace, willing the fire inside her, that strange, dormant fire she still didn't fully understand, to rise. Heat bloomed in her palms. The frost on his skin hissed, retreating from where she touched him. Steam curled between their bodies. "Whatever you're doing," he breathed, "don't stop." She pressed her forehead to his. "I'm not going anywhere." "I told you I couldn't love you." His voice was raw, stripped of every wall and weapon. "But lying here, feeling your warmth against my skin, I think I've been falling since the moment you smiled at your own rejection and refused to let them see you bleed. Don't say that, she whispered, even as tears blurred her vision. You said the curse takes everything you care about. Then let it try. He kissed her, or she kissed him. It didn't matter who moved first, what mattered was the collision. Cold lips meeting warm ones, ice meeting fire. 300 years of curse meeting something older and fiercer and infinitely more stubborn. The mate bond ignited between them like a star being born, his cold, his fear, his desperate buried love flooding through her, and her warmth, her fire, her impossible resilience flooding into him. When they broke apart, Corvain stared at her with something like awe. Your eyes, he whispered. They're glowing. She touched her face. Her skin felt feverish. Deep inside, in a place she hadn't known existed, fire roared to life, not the tentative flicker from weeks ago, but an inferno. The witch blood. Her mother's legacy. Finally, fully awake. And somewhere deep in the castle, in a chamber lined with books and dark secrets, Lord Calder, the king's chief advisor, felt the shift and knew that everything his family had spent centuries building was about to burn. The confrontation came 3 days later. Corvain stood in the great hall of Valdris. Color returned to his cheeks, warmth in his skin for the first time in years, and declared before his entire court what the bond had already confirmed. Seren Crane is my fated mate, my queen, chosen by the goddess herself. The court erupted. Lord Calder's voice rose above the chaos. You cannot crown witch blood. The curse on your line was placed by a witch. You would invite the very thing that is killing you into your bed? The curse is already breaking, Corvain said. Frost no longer formed on his skin. His eyes, once the color of frozen lakes, had warmed to the gray of storm clouds before rain. Because of her. Because she has bewitched you. Enough. The single word silenced the hall. Corvain's authority, no longer cold and brittle but warm and immovable, filled every corner. Anyone who threatens my mate threatens me, and I am no longer a dying king too frozen to fight back. That night, Calder made his move. He came for Seren in her chambers, his hand closing around her throat before she could scream. Generations, he snarled, his face twisted with rage. Generations of the Calder family guiding cold, pliable kings. Centuries of power built on the curse your bloodline could undo. And you think I'll let a half-blood ruin everything? Through the bond, Seren felt Corvain's alarm, felt him running, felt his fury building like a storm. But she didn't need him, not for this. The fire answered her call. Golden flames erupted from her skin, not wild, not destructive, but precise, targeted. They forced Calder to release her with a scream, his palms blistered, stumbling backward into the guards who had come running. My mother was innocent, Seren said, fire dancing across her shoulders like a mantle. She found the truth about the curse, that it could only be broken by a king loving someone from the Blackwood line. And you had her killed for it. Calder's face went white. How do you... Because the fire remembers what you tried to bury. Corvain arrived, flanked by his guard, and took in the scene. Seren wreathed in flame, Calder cowering, the truth finally exposed. The dungeons, Corvain said. His voice was calm. His eyes were not. Let him rot watching his plans turn to ash. The wedding was held in spring, the first true spring Valdris had seen in 300 years. Seren stood at the altar in a gown of crimson and gold, flames embroidered along the hem and thread that caught the light like living fire. Her dark hair was crowned with wildflowers from the gardens she had helped thaw the first blooms the kingdom had seen in generations. Around her, wolves who had once whispered witch blood and abomination now stood in silence, not out of fear, but wonder. Corvain waited for her at the altar. He wore deep blue and silver, colors other than black for the first time anyone could remember. The reformed Valdris banners hung behind him, bearing a flame alongside the traditional wolf. "I love you," he said as she reached him. "I will love you until the stars burn out and beyond." "I love you too," she said. "Since the moment you looked at a half-blood nobody and saw someone worth claiming." When they kissed, fire and warmth merged into something that felt, to every wolf in attendance, like the world exhaling after holding its breath for 3 centuries. At the feast, a letter arrived from Thornhaven. Saren read it 3 times. "I was wrong. About everything. Father has been arrested for his role in your mother's execution. His lies have been exposed. Your mother's name has been cleared. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know the truth finally won. It's over," she whispered. "All of it." Corvain pressed a kiss to her temple. "No, my love, it's just beginning." He was right. The witch blood that had been her curse became her crown. The king who couldn't love now loved so fiercely that warmth spread through every frozen corridor of Valdris, melting ice that had stood for generations. And the half-blood nobody who had smiled at her own rejection, who had refused to beg, refused to break, refused to give her pain to people who didn't deserve it, became a queen whose fire freed an entire kingdom from centuries of winter. And somewhere beyond the veil, 2 women watched. Isolde Blackwood, who had died protecting her daughter's power, and her ancestor, the first Blackwood witch, who had cursed a king's bloodline in grief 300 years ago and had waited all this time to see it undone not by vengeance, but by love. "She did it," Isolde whispered. "She chose love. Just as I hoped she would." "Yes," her ancestor said, tears of peace on her spectral face. "She did." They watched as Saren and Corvain danced at their wedding, as warmth spread through Valdris like sunrise, as wolves lifted their voices to the sky in howls of joy for the first time in living memory. "They'll be happy," Isolde said. "Yes, they will." And they were.